Good morning. It's such a huge privilege to be here. I am not a veteran, but I've had the privilege of spending the last 3 years, after spending years covering Afghanistan, enmeshed in the lives of an incredible group of women and men who answered this country's call to serve. Bringing this story to you has been a privilege, a journey, and really a life-altering experience that actually nothing could have prepared me for. This story begins with some of the most tested leaders in United States Military Special Operations Command saying, "We need women to help us win this war." After 10 years of war, the United States military had gotten very good at fighting, but in the words of Admiral Olson, the first Navy SEAL to lead Special Operations Command, America would never kill its way to the end of its wars. It needed more knowledge, more understanding, and more information about what was happening in the communities in which the insurgency was strongest. But there was a problem, because half the population was out of reach. Because in a conservative and traditional society like Afghanistan, particularly in places where the insurgency was strongest, male soldiers, no matter how good they were at fighting, could not speak to Afghan women. Everything that women saw and knew and understood was entirely out of reach. So in Admiral Olson's view, we needed women out there. So in the spring of 2010, coming into the start of 2011, the Cultural Support Teams were born, which was an incredibly benign name for a groundbreaking concept that would take women from around the United States military who passed the tests of what was called 100 hours of hell and put them onto the battlefield alongside Army Rangers and Navy SEALs in 2011 while the combat ban was very much in place. So the recruiting poster went out because they needed to find women who were fit and fierce and intense enough and also incredibly funny, and many of them about the most entertaining people you'll meet in their life, with a sense of humor and a wry sense of the world that comes with having seen a lot. So the recruiting poster went out and it said, "Female soldiers become part of history. Join special operations on the battlefield in Afghanistan." This was 2011. Officially, they weren't there, because while women could not be assigned to special operations teams like Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, they could be attached to them. And in that difference between attaching and assignment came in life-altering experience for a group of young women who would never be the same after serving at the tip of the spear with men and women who would become their family. In this process of coming together to compete for one of these coveted spots on these teams, these young women found friendship, the likes of which they had never seen. For so many of these young women, they had never been around women who embraced the same kind of "and" they did without being embarrassed about it. These young women showed that you could be fierce and funny, kind and intense, and that you could both like to watch bridesmaids and like to put 45 or 50 pounds of weight on your back and march for an unknown distance, which is usually 10 to 11 miles. As one of these young women said to me, "When we got into the breakfast room in the Landmark Inn in Fort Bragg and saw 50 women just like us, it was like having a moment you realize that there is more than one giraffe at the zoo." In this process of coming together when their country asked them to serve, they found a family. And so many times we do not get to see the young women who are behind these uniforms. But all they wanted to do was to serve with purpose. These were young women like Amber, a gal who looked like Heidi from the storybooks, liked to shoot targets, Coke cans near her neighborhood outside her neighborhood in Pennsylvania, didn't know women couldn't go into the infantry. Found out once she joined, became an intel officer, served in Bosnia, and when the recruiting poster went out, she got the same email that almost every one of her teammates did, which said, "I would never do this, but this looks perfect for you." There was Lane, an Iraq war veteran, a track star who wanted to prove to herself that she could serve with the best of the best and make a difference every night. There was Kate, a West Pointer who played high school football all 4 years and actually wanted to quit after the second year. But when little girls would come up to her after games and say, "I want to be like you," and boys on her team would tell her girls couldn't play football, she felt like she had to stick it out, concussions and her desire to join the Glee Club be darned. every single night, once they became selected for this team, about 200 apply, 110 are brought to Fort Bragg, 55 are chosen, and of that 55, 20 are chosen to go on Army Ranger and Navy SEALs missions every single night. They are selected in either March or May, trained in July and August, and by the mid-August, seeing the kind of combat experienced by less than 5% of the entire United States military. For them, it was about showing immediately that they could make a difference. Like the night that Amber was out, and it's her count when they asked her how many men, how many women, how many children in the house during this nighttime operation, and she gives them her count. And the difference between her count and their count is what reveals that there is a barricaded shooter lying in wait for Afghan and American forces to enter the home. Like the night that Kate walked in and a woman said, "I don't know why you're in my house. The guy you're looking for is 2 compounds over." Like the night Tristan walked in as the Rangers were doing their work in the middle of a nighttime operation and talked to a woman who said, "The place you're going next has IEDs and explosives laced all around it." And that information surely saved lives and limbs that night. Each night they went out to show the value they could bring, the contribution they could make, and to show that they were all about the patriotism and the purpose. Forget all of the politics that other people may have brought to the conversation. At the heart of this team was First Lieutenant Ashley White, who was this mix that everyone would talk to you about, of quiet and incredibly fierce. She was the young woman who loved to bake and make dinner for her husband, and loved to put 50 pounds of weight on her back and march for miles in the Ravenna Arsenal near her home in Ohio. She was, as every one of her teammates would say, the best of us, the one who could climb a 15-foot rope using only her arms and had a bread maker back in her office in Kandahar to make raisin bread for everybody after mission. Some of our heroes return home to tell their story, and some of them don't. And on October 22nd, 2011, First Lieutenant Ashley White was killed on a nighttime operation alongside Sergeant First Class Christopher DeMay and Private First Class Christopher Horns. And her death threw into the very public spotlight a program that had been built for the shadows because, after all, officially women remained banned from ground combat. And at her funeral, the head of Army Special Operations came and gave a very public accounting of this program built for the shadows and said, "Make no mistake about it, these women are warriors, and they have written a new chapter in what it means to be a female in the United States military." But the thing that meant most to her mother was a woman who came up to her at Ashley's funeral, and Mrs. White still does not know who she is. The woman came up and said, "Mrs. White, I brought my daughter here today because I wanted her to know what a hero was. And I wanted her to know that heroes could be women, too." Ashley's War is a celebration of all the unsung heroes we do not often look to for the wisdom and the guidance and the perspective and the value and the heart and the grit and the valor they offer our nation each day simply because their country asked. I hope you will join me in celebrating the unsung heroes all around us and in remembering the heart and the grit and the valor that is at the center of the story of service. Thank you so much.